thiamine. So, I was going to ask you about if you think it's important to hit some of the RDIs and or the recommended daily intake, how it may not matter on a carnivore diet. And one of the concerns I have with beef only is a thiamine deficiency. And it's so interesting you brought that up. I didn't realize that people come in with a thiamine deficiency, and actually it makes sense because we use it for metabolism and energy production. But can you talk a little bit about the RDI, if you think we need to meet it on a carnivore diet, and then about the thiamine?
I'd love to talk about both. Two are favorite subjects of mine. So our vitamin requirement is very different on a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet, or even just a Weston A. Price diet versus the current diet. Right. The current diet creates so much depletion of our nutrients that we're constantly playing catch up, and we actually can't. So this is why Centrum was invented and all of these kinds of things. And a lot of that has to do with food processing. For instance, I was just in Mexico, and while I was there, it was phenomenal to see that almost all the corn I saw was going through the 5-stage process, which releases niacin. And it's very important to do that with corn. People who pop corn, the way that corn is eaten in the States, we don't do that. And when corn was brought up to North America, especially widespread in the early 1900s, it caused an epidemic of pellagra, because when you eat the corn, you get a B3 deficiency, unless it's gone through the 5-step process. So there's lots of foods that we eat that create deficiency, whereas in the traditional way, they would not have. Now, when you eat a diet that's, say, ketogenic or carnivore, you're not constantly depleting nutrients. So you don't actually require the same nutrients. The RDA just goes out the door completely. That said, it doesn't mean that you don't need anything. Right. So usually you can get by, like, if you have nose to tail cow or beef, right? You can get by with that. And I know a lot of people will do the ribeye only, and I use the ribeye only with a lot of my clients, but ribeye salt and water. But it varies by person, and you do have to watch out for vitamin C in some people, not in most. I've seen it twice, and only twice, where we needed some of that. And thiamine, I would say, is the biggest one, because thiamine B1 is so important for energy production, for our lactic acid cycle, really for feeling good, and also for assimilating the other B vitamins. And the issue with it is that it's not in most of our foods today. So most of us are already walking into some kind of protocol with a borderline deficiency, if not significant deficiency, going in. And it's almost, I would challenge someone to reverse it. I haven't been able to reverse it with food alone. It's the one that I can't so far, knock on wood. Hopefully we'll get it. But other ones, it's easy to fix. Like with vitamin C, I can give someone adrenal glands, or I can do pine needle tea if we're not too rigid, right? There's lots of ways around it. Thiamine's a bit difficult because it's mainly found in pork, and you really need to eat about 2 cups of pork a day to get just the basic needs. So if you're coming in debt already, it's a bit problematic. So I see people with thiamine deficiencies who go on the carnivore diet, they'll either start to improve and then pitfall, or they just won't improve as much as you would expect. So let's say you and I both had long COVID, and we both went on carnivore. Maybe one of us would thrive on it, and 6 weeks later really feel pretty good, and the other one at 6 months would just be struggling. Right. That would be the difference there. And I think, especially, thiamine is such a big issue, but I have a theory, and I don't think I'm alone in this theory, that a lot of the people that are getting long COVID have a borderline thiamine deficiency going in, because you need that to fight off viruses. But that's a whole other story.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was first getting into nutrition, I would just make graphics and I'm like, oh, perfect. All of these meats have all of the essential nutrients and we're good. And then as I worked with people, and then you get more of the harder cases where it's like, oh, nose to tail or beef only, or these elimination diets aren't working as beautifully. What is going on? Right. So you fix the macros and it's like, okay, it's still not working perfectly. And then I started looking into the balancing of minerals and then even the nutrients. And then when I started looking into the actual RDI levels or the RDA of beef and liver, so if you're eating like 20 ounces of beef a day plus maybe 1 or 2 ounces of beef liver, it's still maybe 40% of your thiamine. And that's based on the daily value. So yes, we may not need as much, but if we're coming from a deficient state, as you mentioned, which I didn't even think about, but then we may need more. And that's where I think having pork, and I think the second best is probably salmon, but even that's not as high as pork, but you may want to eat a lot more pork, but then not everyone eats pork for one. And then, it's maybe not as sufficient, but that's where I think eating a rainbow on a carnivore diet, it makes a lot more sense, because I think magnesium is another one that's pretty low in just beef. And a lot of people are mineral deficient. So it's really interesting.
No, it's so true. It's so true. And it's quite individual. I think I teach I'm guessing here, I'd have to sit down, but I probably teach like 30 different variations of the carnivore diet, because what works for one person phenomenally, and someone else will need quite a bit more. And it's been eye-opening in my travels with all of these tribes, especially the carnivore tribes. There's way more than people talk about, by the way. I mean, there's actually like a lot. But I was always conservative with my organ meat suggestion due to the risk of vitamin A toxicity and these kind of things that we hear growing up. But the amount of organs that they eat in traditional society is phenomenal. It's so much more than I would have ever thought. So that is a place that someone can go to as well, as long as, again, their histamines aren't too high and they're tolerating that and they can eat it. So yes, it is quite individual.